You're listening to Sound Aside. I'm Libby Dankman. Next, we're going to talk about the 90s and some of the larger-than-life figures who shaped the alt-rock explosion of that decade. But our story doesn't start in the home of grunge here in Seattle. Instead, we're headed to the UK.
That's Melissa. Last name is French. Oh, dear.
That's Courtney Love standing in front of 65,000 screaming fans in August of 1994. And the person whose name she was butchering, a 22-year-old bassist from Montreal named Melissa Auf der Maur. That show in Reading was mere weeks after she joined Hole, Courtney Love's band. And shockingly, it was only the 7th time Melissa had played in front of an audience. Auf der Maur went on to have a highly successful career in music, including as bassist for the Smashing Pumpkins. She has collaborated with many musicians and built a career as a solo artist. Auf der Maur is also a photographer, a craft she studied in her university days. And now she's an author. Melissa Auf der Maur's new book is called Even the Good Girls Will Cry, a 90s rock memoir. It chronicles her early life and time with Hole. And I got to speak with her about it when she stopped by Seattle on her book tour. We had a long conversation about growing up in the public eye. Her father was a famous columnist and politician in Montreal and often wrote about her. We talked about her time as a cassette tape DJ, playing Nirvana songs and meeting many of rock's biggest names. And we talked about how she almost passed up her chance at rock stardom. This is where we're going to pick up that conversation. It was just weeks after the overdose death of Hole's previous bassist, Kristen Pfaff, and Kurt Cobain's death by suicide. Billy Corgan had recommended her to Courtney Love to be Hole's new bassist. And at first, Melissa turned down the offer. But then Courtney Love rejected her rejection. Love demanded that Auf der Maur come to Seattle to tell her no to her face. And so Melissa got on a plane, intending to refuse yet again.
I had definitely said, no, I do not want to be in a band of grieving drug addicts in a bath of fame and corporate major label hell in America. I truly was absolutely not. But then when she did convince me to get on a plane and say no to her face, the slow motion version of what shifted in me is that on the flight between Montreal and Seattle, and this is in July 1994, and I listened to a cassette copy of like an actual rip-off cassette of Live Through This. As a DJ, yes, I had played pretty on the inside. I knew it. I'd seen them play. But there was something in that flight across the country where I thought, okay, I'm going to give this band a moment and flying there and listening to Live Through This in my headphones, hearing those lyrics and that premonition, talk about like live through this with me. I swear that I will die for you. Meanwhile, her release of a record is drowning in the shadow of the death of the most famous person on the planet at that moment, which is her husband. It began to really settle of how outrageous this situation was for this woman, and also what remarkable lyrics and profound anthems for our generation, because I was a daughter of such a frontline feminist. It wasn't something I needed. Like, I already knew I was going to do everything boys did. There was never a moment in my life where I thought, I can't do that because I'm a girl, because my mother did everything that girls weren't supposed to do. So it wasn't like I needed that, whereas some young girls needed Hole to know they were powerful too. I already knew it, but it was more that I then realized she was doing this for our generation, for those who I always knew I was an anomaly, that my mother was remarkably unique in having me as a single mother on purpose. So when I land in Seattle, not really knowing, of course, what I'm landing in, and there is a slow motion moment where I'm coming down the escalators and I, in like cinema, slow reveal, bare feet, silk slip, cigarette in one hand, toddler in the other hand, fellow redhead tomboy girl next to, and I just see these women standing there. So that's Courtney, Frances Bean, and Patty Schemmel, the drummer. And I say this is the moment where my spirit joins Hole, and I see them not as women in bands, not as these people I'm here to like play hard to get, say no thank you, I don't want to be in your band. I'm here as a timeless woman to support women who are in need, who have something remarkable to share about women, which is this album, the power of a female drummer, the power of these feminist lyrics. And that's when I realized, quite literally, I remember just thinking, oh, God, now I have to do this. I was here coming to be polite to say no. But no, I saw these women and I realized these women need a bass player. They need a peer. They need someone who is strong enough to handle this or something. And then over the course of the next few days, and in that flight, I also actually got familiar with the song. So when we went to the rehearsal room, it was really easy for me to pick it up. And all of a sudden I was just in the band. It's like we didn't even it just my spirit joined and that was it. And
can I ask what of the songs off of Live Through This spoke to you the most? Was there one that, I mean, you've talked about the really almost spooky lyrics,
of
that
asking for it.
Yeah. And there's, I think you talk about Plump, obviously in the book and Doll Parts, but what for you is the song that...
Strangely, I guess, now that it's been 30 years since that album came out, since I learned it, the one that sticks with me the most long term is Miss World.
I'm Miss World, somebody kill me.
Which was, the first... single of Kristen's in the video. There's something about that just sticks, and it's something about that self-awareness of Courtney saying, I made my bed, I'll lie in it. This woman who should be dead 150 times over is alive, and we're closer than we've ever been. I've just sung on her latest record, her first solo record in 15, 20 years. It comes out later this year. It's great. I'm so proud of her. She's so alive. And she's looked at herself. There's one thing is that she kept her word. She did make her bed and lie in it. She had a high price to pay for all of that power, all those guts and the ambition. She really, has had a very hard life post that incredible explosion into the world history of rock. And I believe in this book, a huge mandate for me was to reframe a misunderstood woman who was, yes, difficult, yes, a drug addict, yes, very hard to like, all of these things. This woman is so powerful, so intelligent, such a survivor, saved lives. I mean, when I'm just on this book tour, I hugged people last night in Portland crying, saying that album saved their life, a queer kid who otherwise would have had nothing. She saved people's lives by sacrificing herself, and then the world burned her at the stake, blaming her for ruining her husband's life, blaming her for being too difficult. The woman was fearless the only way she knew how to be, because she was an unloved human being who needed to be loved. And that's what, loud, painful people are. They need love and attention. And I recognized that right away in her, which is why I think I'm a credible witness and I am allowed and I'm proud to reframe her so that readers can understand her nobility, her intelligence, and her miracle of survival.
I think that's so important here, specifically in Seattle, because if I'm just going to say the cult of Kurt, especially after his horribly tragic death by suicide, it was so strong here. And there were also a lot of people who have, Courtney stories from back in the day. And a lot of that is probably exaggerated. Half of it's probably made up. But as
might be
write,
true, even. It doesn't matter. It's if she was impossible.
Yeah, she liked to push buttons. But, I'll just say, the Seattle Weekly once joked that the Green River Killer had a better reputation in Seattle than Courtney Love. And it's a joke. And the point of that article in the Seattle Weekly was to defend her. But it still speaks to something that I think exists here today, to this day.
Hate of women.
Yeah.
Hate of women, actually.
And this conspiracy-minded thinking and everything. And, I just wonder if you could, again, say the importance of being right here, where it happened and where a lot of, people still hold these certain views in their minds. Why is it important to be here today with this book and with that message?
It's actually a touchy place to be. Coming here is sort of difficult for me because I know that I'm such a fierce loyalist to her. And for those who might need to be convinced. I didn't speak to Courtney for 15 years. I left her band. I am very aware of her challenges. I experienced them myself on a deep personal level. It's hard for me to be in Seattle, to be very honest, because I feel like, especially in the last 5-10 years, when the world actually has woken up, whether it's Me Too or Weinstein. I mean, everybody might know that she called Weinstein out 15-20 years ago, and it ruined her film career. I mean, this woman is not afraid to call it like it is. And my book, I believe, shows that the inherent patriarchal misogyny of the world cast her into this horrible, woman who just, killed this Jesus Christ. So I am
like a homicidal Yoko Ono.
It's just insane. That is how much people hate women. This is like the issue that I'm trying to also talk about in this book, while also showing, yes, she had abscesses the size of footballs. People were like so mean to her and like sort of like wrote her off as crazy or whatever. But like, listen to those records. Listen to her, even her interviews within the most high, wild times of her life. The truth is still piercing through. So yeah, she is one of the most, but Medusa is cool and powerful, but she also is a monster. This is what I'm trying to show here. And that at this point where we are at with the world unpacking the level of predatory males in the world, look at how this country is being run and the threats to women. Not even just Roe versus Wade. Violence against women is as high or higher than it's ever been. This has been, for me, as a daughter of a feminist, always clear that the number one thing we have to be looking out for is violence against women. And the world was violent against Courtney. That's all there is to it.
You experienced firsthand in Texas, you and the rest of Hull had shotgun shells thrown at you on stage. And I mean, threats. You had threats. There was, security. There's, a great moment when the members of Cypress Hill are basically like offering to defend you.
Yeah, only people on that whole tour. Yeah. No one else in the indie rock bands were there to protect us.
Friends of Kurt who, kind of looked the other way when that was going on.
Yeah, and I had Cypress Hill. I made friends with Be Real for life because he was the only one on that tour who said to me, hey, if you ever need protection, here's my phone number. That's when I realized how dark and twisted the environment was. So yeah, I share all this. It is, and being in Seattle is tough for me because I understand the angel zeitgeist power of Kurt. I am not ever doubting the power of him as an angel artist. But
we just talked about your realization when you heard Teen Spirit. Yes. There's no question that you give the credit where it's due.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's more that sometimes, because what I learned by being in Hull, which I call my lesson in humanity, is in my time with the Pumpkins, my PhD in music. But my lesson in humanity at that time was that he, was all of these tortured, tragic things, his addiction, his Crohn's, all of that. I understand that, and the world has been kind to him. They've literally put him on one of the biggest pedestals of powerful music person and talent. But he did abandon his wife and child. And I'm not saying that as a rude to Kurt. I am saying that as it didn't take long for me, the moment I came down that escalator and saw this single mother and 2-year-old daughter without a father and also without family, without parents. Courtney had terrible parents. It was concerning. Who's going to take care of this girl? Who's going to take care of this woman who was only 27, 28? It was just such and I saw no humanity put on her. Or like no one, there was some okay managers-ish, but then they threw us, like the first tour I ever did with Hole after that Reading Festival was the Self-Destruct tour with Marilyn Manson and Nine Inch Nails. I mean, that's not I don't want to be on Lilith Fair, but at the same time, who was looking out for us? Frances being on a tour like that with that amount of drugs, not just in her mother, but in the bands around us. It was so inhuman. It was so ridiculous. And I didn't see anyone looking out for anyone.
And I should note, too, that, what you talk about there kind of leads into the idea of the music industry and labels and their motivation to make money and not taking care of people. And that also has to do with tragic, disappearance for a long time of Patty, the drummer in Hole, and thankfully she's able to write her own memoir now, and you reference that in the book, but it's just also a theme that comes back again and again. It's just the business does not care.
Well, where are the adults in the room and who's taking care of them? And the addiction being so, now we're living in a slightly more advanced addiction awareness life, but addiction is massive. And yes, in Seattle, and of course the cult of Kurt, I think it's very important that anyone who ever loves Nirvana or talks about Kurt has to be aware of the level of that disease and what it does to not just the individuals, but to the people who live with addicts.
Okay, let's take a quick break here. More of my conversation with Melissa Auf der Maur coming up next. Melissa's going to read a passage from her book, Even the Good Girls Will Cry, and we're going to talk about the strongly worded letter that Courtney Love sent her after she quit the band. Strongly worded, but also inspirational. You'll hear why coming up after this on KUOW.
What's she asking for? What's she asking nice?
Back with more Soundside. I'm Libby Dankman. And we're hearing my conversation with Melissa Auf der Maur, former bassist for Hole and the Smashing Pumpkins. During the interview, she mentioned that not many people had asked her about the experience of being around heavy drug use while she was on tour with Hole. In her book, Even the Good Girls Will Cry, a 90s rock memoir, she describes it as exhausting and dangerous for all involved, including Courtney Love and her daughter Frances. Melissa read an excerpt for me about the tough decision that she made to stay on tour.
I'm plopping us in here to when I'm realizing the extent of this addiction, but also the risk of all of us in this touring party. And we've had to cancel our big sold-out Paris show, and there we are sitting in Paris for a couple days, and I'm wondering, what am I doing here? How is this my life? So here I go. Should I protest and quit the band to make a statement, I wonder? Get on a plane and go home right now? To leave will mean to abandon it all and clear my conscience. It will release me from supporting or facilitating the bizarre infrastructure that's keeping people sick on stage. If I quit, they could fill my spot quickly enough, but if they cancel the tour and ship her home, she could descend into even more drugs. All the options and possibilities are coming up fast now. Then, a new voice steps in. The clear message I'm receiving is, surrender, surrender, surrender. What is happening here in the eye of the storm of our generation, the power, the tragedy, the chaos, the magic, the music, is too special to not have a mindful person present to capture it for the little girls of the future, for Frances. I wrap this integrity around me like armor. I want to be a voice of reason, a voice of meaning. I will not sacrifice myself. I promise myself. I will protect myself. Trust yourself, Melissa. This is a moment where I thought I would leave, and I decided to stay.
But again, you're 22.
I know.
And this is the kind of thing you're weighing. And you're thinking to yourself, if I end up saying something and the tour's canceled, what happens to Courtney? Maybe that's worse. And you have to make that calculation and also think about not sacrificing yourself, as you say. I mean, how does that impact the rest of your life when you're in that situation at 22?
I know. I think, that's a big part of why I wrote this book now, a quarter of a century since leaving all that behind me, is I have a daughter. She's 14. I quit music so radically to become a mother, quite literally never looked at my bass, never touched it again. I had, at that point, when I decided to be a mother at 40 years old, I had been on tour for 18 years. I had made, I'd done the things I'd done, and I thought, okay, well, I don't need to do that ever again. And the association and the sacrifice that I had put my music through that ringer at the very early stages is that I didn't realize until 20 years later how I had pretty much just cut my arm off because it was too painful to think about anymore. And a lot of this book is healing, but for my daughter, because I don't want her to have to carry some unprocessed heavy weight of her mother who never dealt with the 90s, never dealt with the difficulty, because for the listeners to know that, shortly after this, my father dies. He's an addict. So while I'm in hole and I'm watching my whole generation be sucked up by corporate greed, and I lose my best friend in the band, Patty, to her addiction, my father dies, basically having smoked and drank himself to death. It was such a dark abyss / the greatest lesson of my life. And I really never... For whatever reason, I must be programmed to adapt beautifully to difficult things. Because even when my father was dying, I realized this is a gift. This is a gateway. This is an opportunity for you to learn. So I always was truly doing that. But it wasn't until I was a daughter of a 10 and 12-year-old. Like my daughter, I wrote this book when she was turning 10 and I was turning 50. And I thought, I want to understand myself better, actually. How did that happen? And how did I get through it? And I worked with an amazing editor who really pretty much was a grief counselor. And I realized that the book is an ode to the last analog decade, an ode to my generation and the amazing music that our particular group of alternative people committed themselves to. But it's also a eulogy and a mourning of a lost world and a lost innocence that I personally experienced, but so did our whole world. Someone at a book event in the UK, actually, I think it might have been Dublin, my last day, a woman came up to me and said, I want to thank you so much for writing a book about the past as a gift to the future. And that's definitely what I think my motive ultimately is that's why I dedicate it to my daughter and all the girls. This is for future generations to better understand not just the 90s, but what loss is, what addiction is, what women in music are, where misogyny lives, where violence against women lives. Yeah.
I just want to underline that because as a young girl looking up to Hole and to the rock girls of the 90s, I just didn't know what you were facing. We saw you as absolute Wonder Woman style, just Amazon warriors out there. And I think in the 90s, we had this sense of we're breaking it all down. This is, we're fixing it. And you guys were the, out there as the standard bearers. I was shocked when I read through the pages and people were, yelling, show us your and, all this stuff, while you were doing that. And I guess I just want to say thanks because you held it so strongly, you kept all that in and you served that role of being such amazing, again, inspirations.
Well, and this is where Courtney and I, closer than we've ever been, in our 50s and she's in her 60s, we were doing it for a higher cause. We never lost sight that together we were a good partnership, and Patty, of course, to put women on a male-dominated landscape to change the future. That is what kept us strong and together, was we never lost sight of our duty and our commitment to contribute to the world in some way. And I guess, that is why I get so pissed so often of the lack of respect and the legacy of this band that's sitting in the gutters of YouTube and misogyny and everyone's and their dog has a Nirvana shirt and nobody's got a whole shirt. Why? It seems so unfair. And I'm not doing this for selfish reasons. I'm doing this for you, for other people to understand how unfair that was. But the cool part about Courtney and me, I'm not looking for apologies. I just want to help make it better next time. The love I have received putting this book out right now is so profound and so moving. Yeah, so thank you.
And it's also important to have this moment of examination and reflection. It's not always clear at the moment. And so somebody like you who can come along with this hindsight and with this processing, And you're just an amazing writer, like truly an amazing
writer. Oh my
writer.
goodness, my parents. I mean, my parents are masters of the word. My father, I'm not exaggerating, I think wrote this book with me on my shoulder as an angel. There's no question, because I don't know how I wrote my first book. So, but my childhood was chronicled by an amazing writer and storyteller. I grew up in a story that was my father's 3 days a week columns, and I guess it just like embedded in me, you know, in his columns, which I do sample in the book. I bring his voice in. I bring Courtney's letters to me in.
Courtney's letters.
I know,
and
they're
I just
incredible.
Underline. She's an incredible lyricist, but damn, can she write a letter? The line about Melissa, you are not a princess, you're a queen, and princesses get married off and queens rule, and just she was writing to you. I think that was the one that was after the music video where you were unhappy with looking a little too goofy in some of the cuts that were used in the video, and she's trying to tell you about how great beauties are able to be vulnerable and different, not always perfect.
Brilliant. I mean, it didn't even. It took me 20 years. Some people have said, anything you learned in your book that you didn't know at the time that surprised you, which is that the fading faxes from Courtney Love, written to me in the late 90s, I remember them from them. But then when I found them 20 years later, scanned them right as they were fading to oblivion, and I saw the brilliance, and I learned about myself now 20 years later. And then also the other letter in there that I publish is her response to my resignation. And one would think, oh, this wild, angry, powerful woman would tear her bass player down. No, she saw parts of me that I wasn't even yet able to see, which is what a beautiful lifelong friendship is about.
I don't know. Could you tell at the time that she really loved you?
Yeah, I mean, I always knew.
I
always knew that. And of course, I could tell because she never tore me down after I left the band and joined. Not only joined Billy, her, kind of on and off again, ex-boyfriend, nemesis, on and off again, sort of best friend, rival.
Oh, that is
that's the whole thing.
The relationship of you sort of orbiting that and seeing the push and pull of that is the whole fascinating part of this book.
Yes, and they're my grunge parents. I'm some stuck in the middle pawn between the two of them, and then I also simultaneously fall in love with her other nemesis, Dave Grohl. So I mean, the fact is, I could have been bombed by this woman. And no, she treated me with complete respect and never said one bad thing about me other than Melissa's gone off to be Billy Corgan's purse.
Yes, which is an incredible line. And like an accessory, meaning an accessory. I'll just say, as we're wrapping here, you give an extremely good compliment to Dave Grohl, who you dated for years, which had me raising my eyeballs and then going, or my eyebrows, and then going, nodding kind of approvingly and saying, didn't expect that, and it was great. There's
way
some things
too
in
personal.
this book. No. It's wonderful. As a reader, I just appreciated it.
Thank you. Well, thank you. I wrote it for you because truly, I had to ask my husband, my mother. I was like, "Is this too much?" Many of my closest, mainly my husband, said, maybe you don't need to include that. And I said, you know what, though? I do, because it's for the women. And, the history of women's bodies and sexuality have been written by men for men.
Yeah.
So I'm like, this is my opportunity.
Putting the work in. Putting the work in where it counts. And it was a great inclusion in the book. Melissa Auf der Maur, I just want to close here. We'd love to play some music, and you include a suggested playlist at a certain point in the book, and I think it really gave a window into your inspirations. And then, of course, you release a couple of solo albums. My producer Gabby and I have been really enjoying them, and so we're going to leave with Followed the Waves just as we close here.
I'll leave you in terms of Followed the Waves, which is the first single of my first solo record, which came out in 2004, which at the time felt like 100 years after the 90s had ended. It literally was 4 years later. And all the songs I wrote in the 90s. So these were all my own personal songs I wrote while I was in Hole and in the Pumpkins. So it actually is quite 90s of an album. But the cute thing about Followed the Waves is like all my songs, I wrote them on my 4-track at home on my little like home studio setup, and my then boyfriend Dave Grohl wrote the drum parts for this song. So the original demo of Follow the Waves is just me and Dave on a 4-track in our apartment together, which is super cute. I've never really talked about that. I think even when I released the album, I never mentioned it because I was running from the 90s as fast as I could.
That's Melissa Auf der Maur, the former bassist for Hole and the Smashing Pumpkins, also a solo artist. Her book is called Even the Good Girls Will Cry, a 90s rock memoir. It's a page-turner and a fascinating read. Once again, we're going to listen to Followed the Waves. It's one of the tracks from Auf der Maur, Melissa's 2004 solo album. And you can find a couple more of Melissa's favorite songs from the 90s, part of her Essential 90s playlist in the show notes for this segment. Find that at kuow.org/soundside.
Break my heart, the card to play, seal the deal. My heart lies to you. I found the waves to you. I counted the sea and through. But my heart lies to you. You'll never have me true. I found the waves to you. Counted the sea and through. But my heart lies to you. I'll never stay with you. I found the waves to you. I counted the sea and through. But my heart lies to you. You'll never have me true. My fire sighs and my burning eyes. My heart burns wildly in his eyes.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. Don't forget you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at kuow.org or on your favorite podcast app.